a nightmare to others!
Oh Lord! Oh Jesus Christ!
But I will give you a message. The message of death!
Come out to play.
Make no attempt to capture them. They are to be exterminated.
Matron, take them away! Oh!
Stardust!
Mrs. Peel, we're needed.
Hello there, and welcome to another episode of We Need to Talk About ... Once again, the middle-aged movie boys are here, as sophisticated as champagne, as hard as diamonds, and as cool as a pistol barrel, to take a retrospective look back over cult and classic film and TV from across the decades. I am the Big Daddy D, David Mabley, and I move like a cat in carpet slippers.
And I am Luke Murphy, and my watch controls the will, the entire nervous system. But unfortunately, it doesn't keep good time.
And for this episode, we well and truly have our bowler hats donned and our kinky boots clad, as we're going all the way back to the 1960s to take a look at a colourful British television series that truly made its mark on popular culture, with a stylish crime-fighting duo, a world of absurd plots, over-the-top characters, and interesting ways to use an umbrella under situations that it wasn't originally designed for.
Perhaps I am intruding.
You're not intruding.
Despite the show having multiple main characters across its 6-season run, it is actually the 2 seasons involving the legendary pairing of Mr. John Steed and Mrs. Emma Peel that are etched into the subconsciousness of popular culture. So, if that's your only exposure to the series, then allow us, your middle-aged movie boys, to introduce you to, well, some of the other characters.
That was very, very dirty.
If you haven't yet worked this out by this stage, this has absolutely nothing to do with those Johnny-come-latelys from Marvel Comics with their hammers and their shields and their fancy suits of armour. In fact, in this country, the first Avengers film was retitled as Avengers Assemble in order to avoid confusion with what us Brits like to call the proper Avengers. The origins of the Avengers can actually be traced back to a short-lived half-hour series from 1960 called Police Surgeon, which was made by ABC Television. The show itself wasn't a particularly big hit, but the show's main lead, Ian Hendry, was seen as a star in the making. Keen to capitalise on this, ABC's head of drama, a Canadian television producer called Sidney Newman, will begin to set the wheels in motion for a new crime drama series called The Avengers. Now, if the name Sidney Newman sounds a little bit familiar, well, it should, because the BBC would later poach Newman from ABC Television, whereupon he would become one of the masterminds that came up with this little programme called, hang on, wait a second, yeah, Doctor Who. I don't think we've mentioned that before.
Never heard of it.
Neither have I.
That'll never catch on.
Nah.
This new television programme, entitled as The Avengers, would start off as a black and white studio-bound crime series that took more than a slight bit of inspiration from Ian Fleming's James Bond novels and numerous detective noir thrillers. In the show, Hendry plays a brand new character, Dr. David Keel, who would become involved in crime fighting whilst investigating the murder of his fiancée, office receptionist Peggy, by a sinister drug cartel. Keel soon finds himself partnering up with a shadowy government agent called John Steed, who is also investigating the criminal cartel for his own reasons.
Steed was played by Patrick Macnee, who was born in Britain but spent a lot of his early career working in television and radio over in Canada. By the 1960s, he was back in Britain and actually working as a television producer. He was originally rather happy with settling into this role behind the camera when the chance to co-star in The Avengers came up, and although hesitant at first to take another acting job, Macnee eventually agreed to be cast in what would eventually become his most famous role, although he flat out refused to have a moustache, which was originally envisioned that Steed would have.
we go.
The introduction of this secondary character was initially to make the Avengers feel like a different show to Police Surgeon and to share the workload between the two cast members. But as time went on, Steed's importance to the show increased. Although the two men had a common interest, there would often be tension over the way they dealt with crimes and danger, between Keel's naive idealism and Steed's stoic professionalism. Of course, after the case of Peggy's murder has been resolved, the two men found out that they worked very well together, despite their differences, and thus the Avengers are formed.
Your philanthropy is just a little unexpected, I must say.
It wasn't all plain sailing at first behind the scenes, but then again, we're talking about something on this here programme, it's never plain sailing behind the scenes. Hendry actually tore up the first draft of the script in a temper tantrum, calling it utter crap. Oh dear. Shortly after the initial first bit of avenging, it also became clear that the character of Steed needed to have a little more of McNee's natural personality injected into him, as he had been written as rather amoral and unpleasant at times. So Steed underwent an eventual change of wardrobe, turning him from a ruthless and cold-hearted killer in a trench coat into a rather dapper-dressed gentleman of action, acquiring a tailored suit, a bowler hat and an umbrella, with a sword built into it that would become his signature trademark weapon, although he often just used whatever was close to hand.
In fact, McNee insisted on, and was proud of, the fact that Steed almost never carried a gun throughout the Avengers series. When asked why, he explained that he'd come out of a world war in which he'd seen most of his friends blown to bits, and so did not want to have his character associated with doing the same.
The show became a success based on the charm of its stars, but alas, the partnership between Steed and Keel would only be a short one, due to a longer than usual gap between the first and second season, thanks mainly to an extended actors' strike. Ian Hendry ended up leaving the show to focus on his movie career.
Sadly, not only was this partnership a short one, but a lot of it can't actually be enjoyed by a modern viewing audience. A good portion of episodes from this very first season are completely missing. Only 3 complete episodes are known to exist: Girl on the Trapeze, The Frighteners, and Tunnel of Fear, along with only about half of the very first episode, Hot Snow.
Now, programme makers at the time never thought audiences would be interested in rewatching programmes decades down the line. So as a result, the master tapes or film recordings weren't always looked after and would often just be re-recorded over again.
Thankfully, everything from the second season onwards is available, but the season 2 DVD of the show also has to include the surviving episodes of season 1 as well. So as you can see, it wasn't just early programmes of Doctor Who that had this problem.
Have we mentioned Doctor Who before? I can't remember. However, just like with Doctor Who, a lot of these missing episodes would be redone as Big Finish audio plays years after the original broadcast. More on that later.
So on to season 2, and with Henry's departure, the option was either to recast him, replace him with a new character, or just cancel the series entirely. Cancelling the series seemed to be a hasty decision, as the show had proven to be rather popular with audiences. And besides, McNee had made such an impression in the first season that making the decision to have him now become the star of the show, rather than the sidekick, wasn't a particularly difficult one. But Steed couldn't exactly go off avenging on his lonesome. He needed a partner to watch his back throughout season 2.
So for a number of episodes, Steed would also partner up with another doctor, Dr. Martin King, played by the actor John Rollison, which was essentially a low-effort attempt to use the leftover scripts from the Keel and Steed episodes of season 1 without having to do any rewrites. Another occasional sidekick for Steed would be nightclub jazz singer Venus Smith, played by Julie Stevens.
Now, Stevens wasn't Sidney Newman's first choice to play this new character, as he originally wanted Angela Douglas to play the role, but she was not available at the time needed for filming. After that, the decision was made to give the part to Stevens due to her singing ability. But alas, this was another partnership that would only be a short one, as it soon became apparent that Steed needed someone rather more permanent to do his avenging with him.
How's that, eh?
Just what the doctor ordered.
For the second season, producer Sidney Newman had the idea of teaming Steed up with a glamorous female character, Dr. Catherine Gale, who would be Steed's equal rather than his sidekick. This character wouldn't be a damsel in distress either, far from it, but rather a serious force to be reckoned with. Well skilled in hand-to-hand combat and firearms, knowledgeable in various areas of scientific research, and someone who made it notably clear that she wouldn't just simply put up with Steed's sometimes cold and aloof methods.
This ridiculous charade you always have to play. You can't just tell me in plain, straightforward language that you're after a gold smuggler.
Honor Blackman was cast in the role of Cathy Gale. She was a graduate of the Rank Film Organisation's Charm School, which attempted to create new British stars along the lines of Hollywood, and would teach its would-be stars not only the basics of acting, but also how to dress, how to speak in the Queen's English, i.e. talking posh, and even how to sword fight, because, you never know when that might come in handy. The school would end up producing such stars as John Collins and Christopher Lee, among many others. Blackman's casting was an instant success, and Cathy Gale became very popular with audiences. It was clear that the Steed and Gale partnership was the winning formula to go forwards with, as the episodes featuring Gale stood out significantly from the ones with either Martin King or Venus Smith. There was still a lot of action, but now with the added novelty of seeing a woman handling herself in a scrap, and of course there was the chance of having some slight sexual tension between the two leads, even if they didn't really trust each other at the start of the season.
You've been up to something fishy all day. I think it's time you explained what.
What's the matter? Don't you trust me?
Any reason why I should?
Blackman's costumes were designed around what would work best for her action scenes, and leather was chosen, since it seemed durable enough that it wouldn't rip in a fight scene or result in a wardrobe malfunction. But instead of these costumes lowering the sexual tone for early 60s audience, it actually did the opposite.
Might as well enjoy it while we're here.
For the show's third season, Gale got more of a backstory, where it was revealed that she was a widow and that her husband was killed some years ago on their farm in Africa. Her having a flirtatious relationship with Steed was somehow more family friendly if Cathy was a widow. Go figure.
During the second and third seasons, some of the storylines would be grounded crime stories with the occasional step into espionage. But every so often we'd get a slightly whimsical tone and elements of fantasy creeping into the storylines. For example, there's a terrorist group that want to take over the world, but they just so happen to be modelling themselves on the Roman Empire. As you do.
I did know somebody who tried shooting a pair of handcuffs off.
What happened?
Well, nowadays he's laughingly known as Lefty.
For these first 3 seasons, The Avengers was made in a multi-camera television studio and recorded to black and white videotape. Episodes were typically made on a fortnightly basis with 10 days of rehearsals, including fight choreography, before spending a few grueling hours in front of a camera to try and record the entire episode in one long session, like it was a stage play. So just like in early Doctor Who and other TV series of the time, if there were any mistakes that happened, like a prop door falling over, or a camera being visibly in shot, or the actors accidentally talking over each other,
They get one special piece to transmit of a secret.
So nobody
Then they
can
can't
double-cross anybody else?
Exactly.
then these were usually completely ignored, filming just carried on, and these mistakes would end up in the broadcasted episodes.
These broadcasted episodes would often be transferred to film to make overseas sales possible, and because television companies wanted to reuse expensive videotape. Thankfully, it's due to these overseas sales that resulted in a lot of the episodes from season 2 onwards still being available to watch.
What's it got to do with you?
I'm representing Her Majesty's government in the affair.
Does the government know?
Blackman had enjoyed her time as Mrs. Gale, but she had decided to leave the show at the end of her second year. However, before this, the show's popularity led to her and McNee recording a song called Kinky Boots. Yes, really.
And we might have a bit of it playing in the background, providing YouTube doesn't flag it. Boots, boots, kinky boots.
Blackman, however, was soon cast in the role of Pussy Galore in the 1964 James Bond film Goldfinger, and the show would make a nice little reference to her departure.
Oh, how nice of her to remember me. What can she be doing in Fort Knox?
longing for you.
So, the show's fourth season would see some major changes, with only the presence of Patrick Macnee carrying on from the previous seasons. In fact, with Blackman leaving the show, the producers were worried that Macnee would be thinking about doing the same. So they ended up, begrudgingly, I might add, giving him a small share of the show's profits from foreign sales.
The fourth season of The Avengers will be shot on 35mm film, with the filmed episodes being screened in the US on the ABC network during prime time. Now, of course, the company making the programme in the UK was also named ABC. There's no link between the two companies. ABC Television and the ABC Network, they are both just literally called ABC for no other reason than to appear early in the phone book. Yes, that is actually genuinely the reason why. Remember phone books, anybody? God, I'm old.
This is where you'd have companies called ABC or ACE or AAA, just so they could get there first. Yeah. Of course, Steed would need a new partner, and this is when we were introduced to Mrs. Emma Peel. Funnily enough, Emma Peel was originally going to be called Samantha, and as the scripts were being developed, her name was going to be shortened to Mantha. But then Marie Donaldson, a production press officer, had a flash of inspiration when she observed that one of the traits that the showrunners were looking for in this new character was man appeal, or M appeal. So therefore, the new character would instead be called Emma Peel. And no, I'm not making this up.
Now, originally, Elizabeth Shepherd was cast in the role, but after producers watched back over Shepherd's first couple of completed episodes, it was felt that she probably wasn't suitable for the role. She was certainly talented enough, but the character just wasn't the right fit for her, and she was reluctantly let go.
Good morning, Mrs. Peel.
Good morning, Steed. The door's open.
So a hurried recasting process resulted in Diana Rigg becoming Emma Peel instead. She would be a little bit younger than Blackman was, but Rigg had already made a name for herself as a serious actor, in particular on the stage, and her audition made her an instant hit amongst the producers.
Quite a feat considering that over 60 actresses auditioned for the part, and that she originally only went along because she thought it would be a bit of a giggle.
A bit of a giggle.
A bit of a giggle.
Just imagine if you're one of those other actresses that auditioned for it and didn't get the part.
Yeah.
And the person that did get it went, oh yeah, I just went for the laugh.
Just went for the laugh.
Thanks a fucking bunch. Anyway, like Steed's previous partner, Peel was a widow after her husband went mysteriously missing in the African jungle. Again, with the widow, Steed. What's going on there? And the husband's disappearing in Africa? What's all that about? I mean, he's got a type, I'll give him that, a very precise type, but he's got one.
He's definitely got a type. Of course, the production initially treated Mrs. Peel as if she was Kathy Gale Mark II, giving Diana Rigg the same hairstyle and for a time the same leather outfits, and of course she had martial arts skills as well.
Steed and Peel became icons of style and fashion and made for an engaging pair, looking as cool as cucumbers as they actually took it in turns to rescue each other. Like with Steed and Gale, they're definitely just partners, just platonic friends, but a deeper connection was often hinted at slightly, if you read between the lines.
I asked the chief predator where to find you, and he said, Mrs. Peel is in ladies' underwear. I rattled up the stairs 3 at a time.
Mary Quip's department on the 5th floor, sir.
Steed's character had softened and evolved over the years, and by the time of the filmed episodes he was no longer a ruthless cad or thug, but a dapper gentleman of action who enjoyed the good life and would be a little cheeky at times. Of course, that might have had something to do with our heroes enjoying a little bit of the bubbly in particularly every single episode. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if Steed and Mrs. Peel were as drunk as lords most of the time.
I'm a bit shaken, that's all. Ooh, and a bruise you'll just have to take my word for.
Already the show was a big hit, but it was about to get absolutely massive. The format to the film episodes of The Avengers was an evolution of the videotape shows, just with more style and an ability to stage a fight scene much more effectively, and with more camera angles. Oh, and they had actual editing this time as well, which certainly helped.
But as the season went on, the situations would become more bizarre.
I am dead. I've been dead for quite some time.
Episodes would centre around science fiction and horror elements like brainwashing, Day of the Triffids like man-eating plants, a school of assassins designed as a dating agency, and rainstorms that drown its victims. An average episode of The Avengers would feature quite a substantial body count before the end of credits.
6 bodies in an hour and 20 minutes. What do you call that?
A good first act.
Oh, and a year before the Cybermen came wandering across the South Pole in Doctor Who, Steed and Mrs. Peel had to contend with the Cybernauts, robotic assassins who dispatched their unfortunate victims with a well-placed karate chop, accompanied by a suitably over-the-top sound effect. Hi-ya!
These cyber karate chopping contraptions would appear twice during the original series, each time serving a different master, with Michael Gough playing their ill-fated controller for this first appearance. Michael Gough is probably best known for playing the part of Alfred Pennyworth in the Batman movies from the late 80s to the early 90s. He would actually show up multiple times in the Avengers series, but he'd play a different character each time. The Cybernauts would return again years later when the series went to colour, this time with Peter Cushing as their master. And then once again in the 1970s revival series, The New Avengers. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here.
Not only would the storylines and the characters become more surreal and eccentric, the sets and the locations would soon reflect upon this in turn. And, of course, the whole thing would always end in a big fight sequence, because, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Now, if the words kinky and perverse were used to describe the Avengers by some at the time, it's actually not until we get to the 4th season where things start to get a little steamy under the collar. The episode A Touch of Brimstone would occasionally be censored and even banned outright from being broadcast. And although it doesn't outrightly come out and say that yes, the private club in the episode is an S&M bondage club, come on, the signs are clearly there. And we get to see Emma Peel wearing a costume, well, like this.
Touch of Brimstone would later go on to become a very obvious inspiration for the Hellfire Club in the X-Men comics, and it's probably fair to say that Emma Frost was based on Emma Peel too.
Well, not only that, but the Hellfire Club's London branch is led by their Black Queen, who just so happens to be called Emma Steed.
Oh.
Which is quite blatant when you think about it.
Wow, okay.
By the time we got to the 5th season, the Avengers had finally taken a step into Glorious Technicolour and had left behind the days of black and white telly. Which seems like a good time, I think, for us to take a break and refill our champagne flask.
Oh, absolutely.
So, do be sure to come back for part 2, which will cover the Avengers in colour from 1967 to 1969, as well as making a return to television screens in the late 70s for the New Avengers. And, oh god, I suppose we better cover that Avengers film from 1998 as well.
Oh, really?
Bloody hell, Sean Connery, between Zardos and Highlander 2 and this, you really know how to pick 'em, mate. Anyway, see you in part 2.